it was the European Union Data Protection Directive that was existing at the time. I think I'll have to move a bit much faster actually because we need to have time. So that was in existence in Europe, and that was what we were borrowing from because of the what's it called the 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 vacuum that also provide that was also giving rise to, because it wasn't wholesome in its application. They came up with the General Data Protection Regulation of 2018, and we were also still borrowing from there until Nigeria in 2019 decided that, okay, now it's about time that we took data protection seriously. We all know that when it comes to data protection, it's something that is relatively new. I would say that something that came up as a result of the boom in the internet services that we now have. Now you guys have to go online, download applications. You go on. There's a whole lot of boom with the fintech companies, for instance. You go on those applications and you put your data in there. If you have ever worried about your BVN, right? Oh, you go on an application and they want you to put information such as your BVN and all of that. You're worried if your information will be safe, right? That is where this Data Protection Act comes into place. You go on the site or any other platform and they're asking you for personal information. You will wonder your, what's it called? Your card information. Is my information safe? You're just going everywhere and you're putting your information there. Put your family, your sister, your phone number. Is it safe? These people collecting this data, who are they? You can't ensure that, but you need the services, right? And that is where the Data Protection Act and the Commission comes in to ensure that people are being protected and not being taken advantage of and all of that, right? So that's when, the Nigerian government decided to, okay, it's about time we started taking this data protection seriously. So the first initiative of the Nigerian government was to come up with the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation in 2019. So you would see that it's pretty recent, right? And then the implementation framework that came up with it. But that also did not come with, it was the first time, and as with anything that is new, you would expect that there will be some sort of challenges with it, right? So, but right at that time, the National Information Technology Development Agency needs that. Well, you guys will have to, I think I will have to share the slide at some point. Later to you guys so that you can have it to look at later. You don't really have to start writing anything. Like I said, it's introductory. But there are quite a number of acronyms that you may need to get familiar with, in order to, at least have an idea of what's going on. So on the next slide, you'll see. So this agency NITDA, as the name implies, right, it's an agency set up for the administration of all things technology in Nigeria. But this task was put under that agency. It was the best place, I think, the government thought to put it. But when you hear NITDA, you would think that, okay, data privacy, data protection is only something that affects information technology companies, but that is not the case. It is something that affects all entities, whether it is public or private, right? And there is a scope for that, which I will get to later, right? So, but in order for people for this confusion to not arise, right? This function was also taken off NITDA, and then the government came up with this Data Protection Act of 2023, and it was then that the Nigerian Data Protection Commission was now created, who now sits on all things data related in Nigeria. So let's quickly go to the second slide. Here, I just provided these acronyms that I'm throwing around, right? You want to know the meaning and, okay, get a bit more familiar with the terminologies here. So it's the first one is the EUDPD, which I just explained, the GDPR, the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation, which was the first act that was enacted in Nigeria, the NITDA, which is the Information Technology Development Agency, and then the Nigerian Data Bureau. So this Nigerian Data Protection Bureau was created under NITDA at the time. But because now we have the Nigerian Data Protection Commission, they have taken over all activities, and it is being empowered by this current act that is the Nigerian Data Protection Act, right? So now, under this act, so here's the thing. The fact that we have the Nigerian Data Protection Act actually does not abolish the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation. The two of them still run side by side. So in case you go online and you find that, oh, you're still seeing Nigerian Data Protection Regulation, can I use the acronyms just to make it? There are a handful, a mouthful rather. So I think I would crave your indulgence to use the acronyms instead of saying the entire, read out the entire meanings. So I'm trying to be fast here because, we don't really have much time. So now we have the Data Protection Compliance Organization. So these data protection compliance organizations, that is where some businesses here may find themselves falling into that category, right? Not all everybody will need their services because there are requirements for that. But some people may want to render services in relation to this, and some people may want to benefit from the services, but we'll still get to that. Now, we also have the data protection officers. These are the officers now that are in charge, particularly in charge of data protection activities. We have the data controller. The data controller is the entity that is determining for what purpose is data being collected. For instance, let's say I can throw brand names around, right? Like let's say Jumia or Konga, right? Can be the data controller, and an officer in working with any of those companies may be the data protection officer, right? They have their duties and their functions, each one of this. We have the data the data processor will be working with the brands. The data protection officer works with the data protection compliance organization. But in certain arrangements, you can have a data protection officer being designated if your company has retained the services of a DPCO. So the DPO can be a designated officer based on the arrangements to, help with the, with your compliance and regulations. So that you ensure that your company is not running afoul of what the law has provided or what the law requires of your company to do. We also have the data subject. The data subject are me, you, and everybody else whose data is being collected, right? Now, personal data is personal data, very self-explanatory. It has to do with anything that has to do with your personal information, your name, your address, your phone number, your BVN, all the information any information that makes you particularly identifiable. Anything that, okay, once I publish it out there, people will know that this is this person I'm talking about, right? So everything that has to do with personal, it can be more comprehensive than that. We may have heard, scandals here and there concerning all this data privacy breaches and all of that, but we'll still get to that. And then we now have something called the privacy audit returns. I kind of put that there. It's not really, it will concern some of us, like I said, I've been saying. So this audit returns is a requirement of the law that now as businesses, we may find that we fall into this category and we have to, fulfill the conditions for this, right? But we'll do it. Maybe we won't get to it in depth, but I just thought, okay, let me put that there so that I make a note of it and, remember to mention this because this is kind of very important for us to take note of. So let's quickly go to a little bit of differences and similarities between the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation and the Act. So like I said earlier, both of them still run concurrently. The newest one was not established, was not enacted to abolish the previous one. So you will find that there are certain provisions, they complement each other, right? For instance, there's this requirement for annual data protection audit filings, which has been provided for in the NDPR. It wasn't mentioned in the Data Protection Act, but it is still relevant and companies must still comply. So I thought to bring that up, right? So just for you to know that, okay, just because this new act does not say you should do this, does not mean that because it was mentioned in the old act, therefore I mustn't comply. So, there's a whole lot to unpack when it comes to Data Protection Act, the enforcement of it and the implementation. Essentially because as with everything that is new, we will have teething problems. You will have issues with, okay, where do I go? Who do I talk to? And all of those, right? So that's where, if your organization falls within the category of persons who need services of a DCPO, then it will be wise for you to engage their services because they will help to guide and for you to help you to know what to do and what not to do, right? Because it may seem like it's not something that concerns you, but when you engage professionals, people who have been trained by the commission and empowered and licensed, then they will let you know, okay, if I'm on the right path or if I'm not. Because if you're not, then you can get in some serious trouble with the law or with the commission. So now, but here's the thing: the major difference between the two acts is that the Data Protection Act supersede. So that's like the superior regulation, the law with regards to anything data protection in Nigeria. So in the case where you find that there is a conflict or you are not sure where to look, please look to the DPA. You get. But like I said, engaging an entity like a DCPO will help answer your questions. That is if you fall into the category of those who need DCPOs, because not everybody, not all organizations need one. So now, okay, let's quickly move on to the next slide. We are looking at the scope of the Nigerian Data Protection Act. Who does it apply to? When do you need one? When do you need to comply with its provisions, basically? If you are the data controller, now, I mean, I just defined what a data controller is. So if you're an entity that is collecting data or you're processing the data of a person and you are domiciled in Nigeria, yeah, domiciled will be if you are, for instance, registered in Nigeria, right? Your presence is in Nigeria, not just residence. If you have a business and your presence is outside the country, but you are registered as a Nigerian business, then you're domiciled in Nigeria, right? So those are related terms are not exactly the same. If you're a resident and you're operating in Nigeria, so you are bound to comply by the provisions of the Data Protection Act. Yeah. So if the processing of personal data occurs within Nigeria, then you are bound to comply with the provisions of the Act. And when the data controller, the data processor is not domicile or resident or operating in Nigeria, but is processing personal data of a data subject that is in Nigeria. I hope that's clear. You're not domiciled here, you're not living here, you're not doing business here, but the personal information that you're collecting is of a data subject that is in Nigeria, then you would also be required to comply with the provisions of this. So, it won't matter now if you are outside the country and then you think that, it doesn't apply to me. You still need to be conversant with this scope and, ensure that you comply with whatever the Act says regarding its data subject. And so now let's quickly go to DCPOs. DCPOs. These are data processing compliance organizations, right? What do they do? In a nutshell, they monitor, they audit, they conduct trainings, and data protection compliance consulting services to all data controllers. Well, maybe not all. Well, all, but I will still qualify that as we go forward. The Data Protection Act requires that all companies and businesses that collect and process personal data of Nigerians, as defined earlier, whether or not they're residents in Nigeria, it doesn't matter. This act requires that they engage the services of DCPOs to conduct audits. Yeah, but it's not only audits that they conduct. They do a whole lot more than audits. They do trainings. They would help with contract drafting. They will help with your privacy policy. They would help to ensure that your processes regarding this entire data compliance is being done right. Now, they are being trained by the Commission. They have a framework based on which they will work. So they know what to do. They know how to do it. But regardless of that, it is not all businesses or all companies are actually required to engage one. If your data, the data that you're harvesting or collecting, right, is up to that of 1,000 Nigerians, then you are mandated by law to engage their services. So, of course, right off the top of my head, I can name companies that are mandated because we can assume, we have more than 1,000 users of this platform. We have more than, for some companies, and this is in the millions, right? So such companies are mandated to actually have to engage the services of DCPOs. But if your data, the data you're collecting is not up to such numbers, you are not under compulsion or mandated to. So you would say that the word used here is mandated. It doesn't mean that if you feel like it, because there are benefits to you having such an organization work with you. It enhances your profile as a company. There's something about the satisfaction of you being able to say, my company is compliant with data protection. I think it's a good image for your company. It gives confidence to the people who use your platform or who use your services. So you're able to say, to brag and boast that, oh, your services is safe because we are compliant. It's like you having an ISO certification for a product, right? You know what that does for customer, what's it called, confidence. You know, when you see an ISO mark on a product, it's telling you this is quality assurance, right? So it's sort of that kind of confidence that having a DCPO does to for your business. So, I mean, when you're thinking about how it affects your money, sometimes it's not about how it directly impacts, okay, how much is coming out or how much is going out of my pocket, but how it's able to translate into sales for you or into revenue for you. So you can start to, I mean, put two and two together and make that connection yourself. Because really, I'm not here to tell you this is how you will generate money from this. If I had the answer, you have to pay me to get that answer out, right? Yes, and that's the truth. Yeah, but it's for you to take the knowledge and to be able to apply it. I mean, do some more research on your own, of course, because we can't tell you everything in 30 minutes, right? But it's for you to now see how, look more into it, delve deeper into it, and see how you can take advantage of it, how you can leverage on it to enhance your marketability, for instance. So that's where that's the relevance of this. So even if you don't have up to 1,000 Nigerians on your list that whose data you're collecting, you can still. And then sometimes you may think you don't have up to, but by the time it crosses 1,000, you may not even be aware, right? So it makes sense if you're on that path to engage one and be ensuring that you are doing things the correct way. So for data, for DPCOs, right? Some of you may be wondering, how do I get into this? How can I register to be a DPCO? How can I go about it? There are 4 categories of entities that the law has actually specifically stated in the Act that can render the services of these DPCOs. We have law firms, we have audit firms, we have IT service providers, and we have professional service consultancy firms. So if your business falls into any of these categories, you're eligible. Now, there are other criteria that you will need to satisfy in order for you to be able to apply to be one. If you want to apply to be one, it's done online, right? But I have certain information that right about now, the process is being halted and you may need to, maybe get to Abuja or something if you want to get this thing done. I'm not sure if you have up to 200 entities registered so far. The last updated list of the website was less than that, but I think there are more, right? I don't know if they update regularly, but if you go on the Commission's website, you will see the requirements that for you to be registered as one. So if you're looking to be one, I would encourage you to look at it. There is, of course, money involved when it comes to registration, but well, on the bright side, there's also money to be made. You use money to make money, right? So if you fall into these categories, or if you think that you have the interest or the qualification, this is something to look at. And that's also one way in which this affects your business and your money. So, but as to why companies would need to use your services, I think it's also important to look into that. Because if you're going to be thinking, okay, I can do it myself or something, or why would they need me as a DPCO? This is the thing. There's a requirement by the Commission, that all data controllers must do the following. It's a guideline of sorts. An entity as a data controller, you're required to, first of all, read and understand the NDPA. Secondly, you're supposed to develop and implement a privacy policy that is consistent with the NDPA. So now, okay, let me just read all of that through first. Then you're supposed to notify your employees and your customers and online visitors of your privacy policy, and then finally designate at least 1 or 2 members of staff as data protection officers. If you can do all of this by yourself, you may be fine, right? But like I said, it would look like it's not a lot. But when you go through the provisions of the Act and its implementation framework, that is when you will now realize that, okay, there is actually a whole lot here for me to unpack. So while it looks like this is simple, right? When you delve deeper into it, you realize that it's not as simple as it seems. So that's where the DPCOs come into play. So, and you may need to engage the services of one. And then, and then another thing is, if you run afoul of the provisions of this act, you will find yourself in some real big trouble with the commission, right? So you want to ensure that you are in their good books and everything is being done right. Otherwise, it might be, you may lose a lot of money if you don't. Why is data protection important, and why would you be at risk of, how will it affect your money and all of that? First of all, we're talking data protection, and data protection. It's important to note that it is a provision it's a fundamental human right as guaranteed by the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, right? The right to privacy, right? So now, if you are giving that right away, that right has to be given away with your consent. That's the number one thing. And that's why you would find that when it comes to collecting data of minors, for instance, you would find that if you go on some sites, many of you, a lot of people don't read privacy policies. So if you are giving your consent away, I think it's important for you to be looking at, because you might, if you are going to what's it called, to take action if your data has been in breach, and then you have willingly signed away something that does not allow you to be able to go after the company, then you're on your own, right? So when we are going on websites and we are doing all of this, I think it's important to at least take a few minutes or seconds to glance through what they're asking you to sign, because you just click and we just go away, and then that's it, right? But we need to be more careful when we do all of these things. So in as much as the Constitution guarantees the protection of your fundamental human rights, and the government is trying to see how we can further protect people and ensure that their rights are not being abused, right? By these people to whom you are entrusting your private information and all of that, you also need to be cautious, right? If you remember the case of I think that's the biggest case in history so far, the Meta Cambridge Analytica matter. I think it was something that had to do with the US elections and tampering, and there was accusations that Meta had abused its privacy policies, and maybe sold off the information to an entity who used it for a purpose for which it was not meant to be used. Now, in a country like the United States, we know that they don't take things like this they don't take it lightly. So Congress sat on this matter. I still remember seeing Mark Zuckerberg looking very humbled at the hearings then. And then there was a fine eventually, and they paid a whole lot of money as settlement. The figure that's $5 billion right there, which was settlement that they paid to the US government. I think there was another settlement of about $700+ million that went to Cambridge Analytica in this matter. That's a whole lot of money, right? But to my knowledge, that's the biggest in history so far. In other jurisdictions, of course, there are other, there are fines, there are criminal actions filed against companies that are in breach of privacy matters. As an individual, you can also take up a matter if a company has been in breach of your privacy, if they have actually been in breach and able to establish. But in Nigeria, as I was saying earlier, this is new. This is, when it comes to things that are new, there'll be teething problems and all of that. But you can be the landmark case. And then moreover, the commission, okay, here's the thing. Because it's new, many companies will still get away with a whole lot of things, even though the commission says, okay, this is the deadline for you to comply with certain things. For instance, if we go back to the first slide, the second one, where it talks about this privacy audit returns. Now, this privacy audit returns is something that is supposed to be filed. It's like when you file your annual returns at the CSA, for instance. It's something that you do annually to the commission. That's the Corporate Affairs Commission. Now, this Data Protection Commission is also saying all companies are required to file this privacy audit returns. That is if you are collecting data of people. So it won't matter if the data that you are collecting is not up to 1,000 persons. So the distinction is that requirement of 1,000 persons is as it relates to engaging DCPOs, right? I mean DPCOs. But now this privacy audit returns, this affects everybody who is collecting data. So even if are not collecting up to 1,000 data of up to 1,000 persons, or your what's it called, database is not up to that, right? You are still required to comply. The date for compliance, the deadline for each year is sometime in March. So if you don't comply early, there will be penalties. Like just like you file your annual returns, late filing comes with penalties and all of that. Again, because it's new, we are yet to see how this really plays out. But as a business person, it's important to start being aware, to be aware of all of these provisions, so that when it hits you, when you're getting a call or a notice or a visit from the commission, you're not wondering, okay, why is this happening, right? So it's something that we should start being aware of as business persons. This privacy audit returns, I would encourage us to look into it and see how it affects us, so that we don't run afoul of this provision of the law. So here's the thing. Okay, the penalties for non-compliance when it comes to to failure to comply with the provisions of the Act, right, is that you will be at risk of getting a penalty or being levied a penalty of up to 2% of your gross annual revenue, or 10 million naira, whichever is greater. The law, from history, they always go for the greater number. So if your company is not making up to 10 million naira gross revenue, right? So sorry, of up to 2% of your annual gross revenue, or 10 million naira, right? Whichever is greater. So whichever is the greater of the two. So if 2% is the greater number, if your company is making more than 10 million naira gross annual revenue, the commission automatically applies the 2% as your penalty. It's not even your what's it called now, your net profit or your net revenue here. It's saying gross. We know that is a whole lot of money. But I think it's safe to say that this figure would apply to big companies, right? We are saying, I mean big companies, maybe like the telecoms, like the what have you. I mean, those deal heavily with personal data of people. So yeah, it would definitely apply. If any other company is making up to this, yes, it would apply. There is a lesser figure. There's a way it is prorated or calculated if your company is not making up to this. But the bottom line is that the fine is heavy. I think I put this there for the shock value so that you can see how huge it can get. So, but if your company is not making up to this, the fine is still just as steep and as heavy, right? And in addition to this, it is not only the monetary loss that is that matters here. There is also criminal liability, and there's also civil liability in addition to the fine. So your company can still be prosecuted. Somebody can still go to jail if you have used data collected from people for the wrong purposes, for the purpose for which it was not meant to be used, right? So these are aspects of the Data Protection Act that we need to be conversant of and be aware of. So I think, I don't know if this really has done justice to what we need to know with regards to how it affects you and your money. Like I said, anything else will be going in depth into it, and we'll need a whole lot more, like a full day's training for us to be able to cover all of that. So this brings us to the end of this short session. All right.